Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. It's Tuesday, the 11th of November, and we have Jessica Amir, market strategist at moomoo, coming out to us from Sydney as our guest today. Now, Jess, as always, great to have you on the show.
Great to see you.
Now, Jess, first of all, I need to get your insights into what's happening in Australia, particularly with the RBA.
So there's been a lot going on, I guess, across the Asian Pacific, but yeah, bang on, the RBA, they increased interest rates after keeping them on hold for 4 straight months, basically taking the cash rate to 4.35%. So that's a 12-year high. And this is basically in the face of half of Australian mortgage holders being under financial distress. But across the broad Asian Pacific, there's a lot going on. We're seeing the benchmark index for Asia actually trade lower for the first time in 4 days, really seeing equities, I guess, pause and reflect and I guess take some profits off the table after a healthy rally that we saw last week and yesterday. But elsewhere, we did get some economic news out of China as well. We saw some great news for Chinese imports that surprisingly rose, so marking the first increase in imports in 13 months, would you believe? And I guess that really highlights, Brian, the manufacturing demand is rising in China. Stimulus is making its way through to the Chinese economy. But on the downside, though, we did see some disappointing export data, and that's basically showing the potential R word could be coming for the global market.
Now, speaking of the potential R word out of the US economy, the jobs numbers on Friday came in lower than expected, but there's a lot of optimism around the fact that a strong rally could be on the cards for US equities moving forward. What's your view on this at moomoo?
You're 1000% right. Absolutely, Brian. So from a fundamental perspective and technical perspective, we've got a marriage made in heaven, I guess you could say, for the broad US market. So there's high hopes that the Fed can probably stop their hiking campaign and really move to cutting interest rates. And now the good news is the market is actually pricing that in. So there's a 100% chance of a rate cut in June. And that's because employment is showing signs of fatiguing. So we also saw, on top of those weaker numbers, we also saw the unemployment rise as well. So if we think about the factors that are supporting the rally, so we mentioned the fundamentals and the technicals, you've got the S&P 500's quarterly earnings. They're rising, seeing the strongest earnings in a year, Brian. That's supportive. Plus, you've got floods of investors coming into the market, and that's because the S&P 500 was in oversold territory from a technical perspective, and it was actually down over 10% in correction territory. So that naturally we're going to see fund managers buy the dip, and of course the market is likely to continue to rally because seasonality. It's Christmas time. We've got the Santa rally. End of quarter is traditionally the best month for equities, and so too is December, and it's all for good reason. Buybacks are coming thick and fast, and of course consumer discretionary stocks are getting a nice healthy boost because sales are higher.
Now, Jess, because we've got you on the show, I'm going to drill down a little bit more about Australia. One of the things that's not talked about enough, I think, across markets is the fact that Australia is in the process of experiencing severe weather patterns, which are going to impact quite a lot of different equities and also commodities. Give us your insights into what are these changes and how we could perhaps make money out of this.
That's a great question, Brian, because I think we've just all got to stop and reflect, as you said, and think about global temperatures, what is happening. And remember what happened back in the middle of the year. We saw world record high temperatures. In fact, remember what happened in Europe amid their Northern Hemisphere summer. So we're thinking we're probably going to see some record hot days again, but this time here in Australia. So Australians have been put on notice, and that's by the Bureau of Meteorology, basically warning of severe weather because our peak season is ahead of us. So we're already experiencing bushfires, and there's warnings that could continue, as well as heat waves, severe thunderstorms, flooding, tropical cyclones, and these are all part and parcel with El Nino. And then on top of that, Brian, what you touched on is really important for global food supply, El Nino. So the Bureau of Meteorology came out and they said, hey, El Nino is probably going to hit 70% of crops. So that means you're probably going to see higher commodity prices, higher prices in your shopping trolley, energy demands are going to pick up, and then, of course, high insurance premiums as well. So, I mean, you've got to think about the threat of grass fire. That is increasingly high, and that's because we've experienced very high above average rainfalls for the last 2 to 3 years. And so now the setups, if you have a look at the technical setups for some agricultural ETFs, they're suggesting we're probably going to see a big pickup here. So if you think about some of the world's biggest trackers of the food indices, we've got the iShares MSCI Ag Producers ETF. You've also got Invesco's Food and Beverage ETF. These ETFs, as well as BetaShares Food and Agricultural ETF, all of these ETFs, Brian, they've actually just really turned, and they're probably going to see a very sharp move to the upside, not only because they're in oversold territory, but because of that seasonality factor. So I'm just saying that investors really need to keep an eye out on these funds, because they're probably likely to head higher as well because of the lift in El Nino.
Now, on that note, Jessica, and I'm going to take a mental note and look at those ETFs. Thank you very much for your insights. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Now, we've been speaking to Jessica Amir, market strategist at moomoo, on BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.